What would you do if, on an ordinary morning in your quiet garden, your child's very first words suddenly turned a simple day into a memory so sacred that you knew you would carry it in your heart for the rest of your life? There are storms that tear families apart, and there are mornings so gentle they make people believe heaven has touched the earth for a little while. This was one of those mornings. The grass was still soft with light, the roses swayed in the breeze, and a little girl with cloud-soft hair and unsteady steps wandered into the garden as if she had just discovered the whole world for the first time. Her parents stood nearby, smiling, watching, breathing in the kind of happiness that comes only after hardship has finally loosened its grip. Then, in the middle of flowers, butterflies, and the trembling joy of a first adventure, their daughter opened her mouth and spoke. One small sound, one tiny word, and suddenly, love that had already endured so much became larger, deeper, and more complete than ever before. The morning began in silence, but not the lonely kind. It was the full, restful silence that settles over a home when, for a rare moment, no one is running from pain, no one is carrying fear, and no one is bracing for the next heartbreak. The sunlight filtered through the dense green leaves above the yard, spilling down in soft golden patches that moved gently over the grass. The whole garden looked as though it had been waiting for this exact day, flowers open, air sweet, the earth fresh and warm under the light. Tu Tien stood on the porch with CEO Jack beside her, and for several moments neither of them said a word. They were looking at their daughter. Little Anna, only 1 year old, stood in the middle of the backyard on uncertain legs, her tiny body swaying with the soft determination of a child who has only just begun to understand that the world is something she can move through. Her hair was light and soft like white clouds drifting low after the rain. Her round eyes shone with that deep, dark brightness only babies seem to carry, as if wonder itself had taken human form and learned to blink. She took one step, then another, then stopped, steadied herself, and laughed at nothing more than the sensation of standing in open space with flowers all around her. To anyone else, it might have looked like an ordinary child playing in an ordinary garden, but to her parents, it felt like witnessing something holy. Tu Tien pressed one hand lightly against her own chest as she watched their daughter's tiny feet cross the grass. Every wobbly step stirred something inside her that was too full and tender to be put into simple words. Beside her, Jack held a camera at first, instinctively wanting to preserve the moment. But after only a few seconds, he lowered it. Some moments refused to be reduced to recordings. He understood that now, with painful clarity, the real treasure was not in capturing the image. It was in standing there, alive inside it. The garden itself seemed to have become a world built just for Anna. Along the path were clusters of roses in red, pink, cream, and yellow, their petals shifting delicately every time the wind passed through. Wildflowers peeked up from the edges of the lawn, catching the sunlight in small flashes of color. Butterflies, bright and golden, moved lazily through the air as if they, too, had come to greet the little girl. Anna saw them and burst into laughter so clear and ringing that it filled the whole yard. She stretched both hands toward them and clapped at the empty air, delighted by something too beautiful to catch. "Look at her, Jack," Tu Tien whispered softly, her voice full of smiling wonder. "She's so happy." Jack turned to look at his wife then, and for one quick, quiet second, he was struck by how much peace had returned to her face. There had been days in their past, too many days, when peace had seemed impossible. Hardship had taught them to treasure ordinary joy because they knew exactly how fragile it was. That was why this morning touched them so deeply. It was not only beautiful because Anna was laughing. It was beautiful because laughter had survived. Love had survived. The family they had once only dreamed of was now standing under sunlight with grass underfoot and a child discovering butterflies. Anna wandered farther toward the flower beds, then paused when her mother bent slightly and asked in a playful voice whether she wanted to pick some flowers. The little girl turned at once, eyes bright with interest, and Tu Tien gently lifted her toward a bush of red roses. Anna's tiny fingers brushed the petals first, hesitant and curious. Then she leaned forward with the earnest seriousness of a child experiencing fragrance for the first time. She inhaled softly, blinked, and immediately broke into a delighted laugh. The sound was so innocent, so full of life, that Jack felt something open inside his chest. He crouched beside them and smiled. "Let Daddy help you," he said gently, though his voice was already warmer and more emotional than he intended. He placed his large hand over Anna's tiny one, guiding her fingers around the rose stem with great care. The difference between their hands was almost too moving to bear. One hand had built, protected, labored, held on through difficulty. The other had barely begun its life. Yet there they were, joined over a flower in the morning sun. And then it happened. Anna lifted her face, looked at him with all the casual certainty of a child who had no idea she was about to change the air around her forever, and said in her soft baby voice, "Da." The sound was tiny, barely more than a breath-given shape. But in that moment, it rang through the garden louder than any music. Jack froze. Tu Tien froze. For one impossible second, even the breeze seemed to stop. Jack's eyes widened, and all the breath rushed out of him at once. The hand still guiding Anna's remained in place, but his whole body had gone still with shock. Pride, joy, disbelief, gratitude, all of it hit him in the same instant, so powerfully that it made his vision blur. He had imagined this moment before, of course. Every parent does. But imagination is always smaller than reality. Nothing had prepared him for the sweetness of that one syllable falling from his daughter's lips as naturally as sunlight. Tu Tien let out a trembling laugh that turned almost at once into tears. "Jack," she said, her voice breaking with happiness. "She called you Daddy." Jack repeated the words like a man trying to make sure they were real. "She called Daddy." His own voice cracked. He leaned forward and kissed his daughter's forehead with such gentleness that it looked like reverence. If someone had asked him in that moment what success meant, he would not have spoken of titles, contracts, money, or achievements. Success was this: a child's first recognition, a tiny voice calling him into fatherhood not as an idea, but as a living truth. Then, before either of them had fully recovered from the first miracle, Anna turned her head toward her mother. Her eyes lingered there for one beautiful second, and then she said, "Mom." That second word undid them both. Tu Tien covered her mouth as tears ran freely down her cheeks. The joy that had already filled her heart seemed to multiply until it was almost painful. There are moments when happiness becomes so complete that it resembles grief, not because it hurts, but because the human body does not know how to hold so much feeling at once. Jack rose and put one arm around his wife while she gathered their daughter close. And there in the garden, surrounded by flowers and soft grass and morning light, the three of them held one another as though the whole world had narrowed into one sacred circle. If the first word had opened a door, the next hour turned the whole garden into celebration. Anna, now aware that these sounds had the power to make her parents laugh and cry all at once, began to repeat them more boldly. "Da, Mom." Each time the words came out, even imperfectly, they landed in her parents' hearts with the same astonishment, as if language itself were being invented right there in front of them. A small rabbit darted across the grass near the edge of the flower bed. Anna spotted it immediately and dropped into an eager little crawl after it, laughing as it hopped away just beyond her reach. Tu Tien pointed and told her that the rabbit was her little friend. The child stretched out one hand, then turned back toward her parents, delighted by the game, and called again in her new proud rhythm, "Da, Mom." That simple call became the heartbeat of the morning. It connected her to them in a way that felt larger than speech. Each repetition deepened the sense that something irrevocable and beautiful had begun. Jack bent down and lifted her high into the air, careful, steady, smiling with a joy so open that it transformed his whole face. Anna threw her tiny arms upward and squealed as the wind caught her soft hair. Then her mother took her onto her shoulders and walked slowly toward the old tree at the far side of the garden. From there, Anna could see more. The birds shifting in the branches, the clouds moving above. She pointed upward with the earnest excitement of discovery and tried to name everything she could. "Bird," she said, or something wonderfully close to it. Then, after seeing the bright patches drifting across the blue, she called out again, "Cloud." Jack laughed fully then. Not the measured, polite laughter adults often offer the world, but the deep and honest laugh of a man whose heart had been relieved of its weight. They walked together after that through every corner of the garden. Anna sat in the middle of a patch of wildflowers in green, yellow, and purple, grabbing at petals and tossing them into the air with all the delight of someone convinced she had discovered a secret game between herself and the wind. Each time she threw the flowers, she called again for "Da, Mom," as if making sure they were both still there to witness her kingdom. And they were, always close, always watching, always answering her laughter with their own. That was what made the day so moving. Not only the child's wonder, but the fact that both parents were entirely present inside it. No one was distracted by anything that truly mattered less. No one was looking beyond the moment for something bigger. They understood, perhaps because life had taught them harshly enough, that this was already big enough. By late afternoon, the sunlight had softened. The garden glowed in warm gold. The roses looked deeper in color. The grass had lost its morning brightness and taken on the richer calm of evening. Anna was tired now, but it was the good kind of tiredness, the kind that settles into a child after a day of joy. She clung first to her father, then to her mother, still murmuring the words that had changed everything. "Da, Mom." They sat together on the grass. Anna leaned heavily against Jack's shoulder, her little body growing heavier with sleep, and then turned with sudden seriousness toward both of them, as if one more question had risen in her heart before rest could take her. In her small, soft voice, she asked whether Daddy and Mommy loved Anna. The question was simple enough to break them open once more. Anna Tu Tien bent immediately to kiss the top of her daughter's hair. She told her with a voice so tender it almost seemed to tremble under the weight of truth that Mommy loved her very, very much. Jack followed at once, telling his little girl that Daddy loved her endlessly, that there was no measure for what she meant to him. Anna smiled. It was the peaceful smile of a child who has heard the answer she needed from the people who make the world safe. Her eyes grew heavier, then closed. By the time the sun had lowered behind the garden wall, she was asleep in her mother's arms, her cheek resting softly against familiar warmth. Jack sat beside them and looked for a long time without speaking. At last, in a voice quiet enough not to disturb the sleeping child, he said what had been filling his chest all day. They were lucky. More than lucky. Anna was not simply their daughter. She was their whole world. Anna Tu Tien smiled then and placed her hand gently over his. She said they would always be there for their child. They would teach her love, wonder, kindness, joy, not only with words, but with mornings like this, with gardens, with flowers, with patience, with the kind of home where a first "Da, Mom" would be treasured more than anything money could ever buy. The last light rested over them like a blessing. Nothing dramatic happened after that. No interruption, no sudden shadow, only peace, only the sound of evening settling over a small family who, for one extraordinary day, had been given a memory that would never fade. Long after Anna would grow, long after the garden changed through seasons, long after life brought new worries, new work, new responsibilities, this moment would remain untouched in their hearts. And perhaps that is the emotional truth this story leaves behind. The most powerful love is often not found in grand events, but in the small, sacred moments that seem ordinary until they happen. Your child's first steps on soft grass, her first wonder at butterflies, her first words spoken into the air, and the realization that everything you have endured was, in some quiet and beautiful way, leading you here. Because in the end, a family is built not only from blood or duty, but from shared wonder, from presence, and from the kind of tenderness that turns one simple morning into forever.